Alright, welcome back. Here we are with part 3 of great stories that Neville Goddard shared himself about students that applied the power of their own imagination. So through these stories you can learn how to apply your own imagination towards your own dreams in life and actually manifest those dreams. So always keep an open mind and hopefully it will inspire you on how to go about your own business in life if you haven't heard these stories before. Some of you might have heard them, others may have not. In the case of not hearing them before, well, that's the purpose of these videos. They will at least offer you some suggestions on what to do. So let's get right into it. As my story begins at the age of 19, I was a mildly successful dancing teacher and continued in this static state for almost 5 years. At the end of this time I met a young lady who talked me into attending your lectures. My thought upon hearing you say, "Imagining creates reality," was that the entire idea was ridiculous. However, I decided to accept your challenge and disprove your thesis. I bought your book Out of This World and read it many times. Still unconvinced, I set myself a rather ambitious goal. My present position was as an instructor with the Arthur Murray Dance Studio, and my goal was to own a franchise and be the boss of an Arthur Murray studio myself. This seemed the most unlikely thing in the world, as franchises were extremely difficult to secure. But on top of this fact, I was completely without the necessary funds to begin such an operation. Nevertheless, I assumed the feeling of my wish fulfilled as night after night, in my imagination, I went to sleep managing my own studio. 3 weeks later, a friend called me from Reno, Nevada. He had the Murray studio there and said it was too much for him to cope with alone. He offered me a partnership and I was delighted. So delighted, in fact, that I hastened to Reno on borrowed money and promptly forgot all about you and your story of imagination. My partner and I worked hard and were very successful, but after years I was still not satisfied. I wanted more. I began thinking of ways and means to get another studio. All my efforts failed. One night as I retired, I was restless and decided to read. As I looked through my collections of books, I noticed your slender volume, Out of This World. I thought of this silly nonsense I had gone through 1 year ago before getting my own studio. Getting my own studio. The words in my mind electrified me. I reread the book that night and later, in my imagination, I heard my superior praise the good job we had done in Reno and suggest we acquire a second studio, as he had a second location ready for us if we desired to expand. I reenacted this imaginal scene nightly without fail. 3 weeks from the first night of my imaginal drama, it materialized, almost word for word. My partner accepted a new studio in Bakersfield and hired the Reno studio alone. Now I was convinced of the truth of your teaching and never again will I forget. Now I wanted to share this wonderful knowledge of imaginal power with my staff. I tried to tell them of the marvels they could accomplish, but I was unable to reach many, although one fantastic incident resulted from my efforts to tell this story. A young teacher told me he believed my story but said it would have probably happened anyway in time. He insisted the entire theory was nonsense, but stated that if I could tell him something of an incredible nature that would actually happen and which I could have witnessed, then he would believe. I accepted his challenge and conceived a truly fantastic test. The Reno studio is the most insignificant in the entire Murray system because of the small population count in the city itself. There are over 300 Murray studios in the country with much larger populations, therefore providing greater possibilities to draw from. So my test was this. I told the teacher that within the next 3 months, at the time of a national dance convention, the little studio would be the foremost topic of conversation at that convention. He calmly stated that this was quite impossible. That night when I retired, I felt myself standing before a tremendous audience. I was speaking on creative imagining and felt the nervousness of being before such a vast audience. But I also felt the wonderful sensation of audience acceptance. I heard a roar of applause, and as I left the stage, I saw Mr. Murray himself come forward and shake my hand. I reenacted this entire drama night after night, began to take on the tones of reality, and I knew I had done it again. My imaginal drama materialized down to the last detail. My little Reno studio was the talk of the convention, and I did appear on that stage just as I had done in my imagination. But even after this, unbelievable but actually happening, the young teacher who threw me the challenge remained unconvinced. He said it had all happened too naturally, and he was sure it would have happened anyway. I did not mind his attitude because his challenge had given me another opportunity to prove, at least to myself, that imagining does create reality. From that time on, I continued with my ambition to own the largest Arthur Murray dance studio in the world. Night after night in my imagination, I heard myself accepting a studio franchise for a great city. Within 3 weeks, Mr. Murray called me and offered a studio in a city of 1.5 million people. It is now my goal to make my studio the greatest and biggest in the entire system. And of course, I know it will be done through my imagination. This is absolutely brilliant. You gotta approach all of your own dreams in this manner. Come on, let's do it. Whatever your dreams or goals are, just start imagining it to the best of your ability in the most fulfilled scene that you could possibly imagine. That's what he did. You want to imagine yourself right into the state of your fulfilled desires, as Neville said? Well, this person did exactly that. What are we waiting for? I'm doing it. Others are doing it, and you could be doing it yourself for whatever goal you still want to realize and manifest in your world. Alright, here we are with the second story. Some time ago we advertised our home for sale, which was necessary for us to buy a larger property on which we had placed a deposit. Several people would have bought our home immediately, but we were obliged to explain that we could not close any deal until we learned whether or not our offer for the property we wanted had been accepted. At this time, a broker called and literally begged us to allow him to show our home to a client of his who was eager for this location and would be glad to pay even more than we were asking. We explained our situation to the broker and to his client. They both stated they did not mind waiting for our deal to be consummated. The broker asked us to sign a paper, which he said was not binding in any way, but would give him a first chance at the sale if our other deal went through. We signed the paper and later learned that in California real estate law, nothing could have been more binding. A few days later, our deal for the new property fell through, so we notified this broker, and his verbal response was, "Well, just forget it." 2 weeks later, he filed suit against us for $1,500 commission. Trial date was set, and we asked for a jury trial. Our attorney assured us he would do all he could, but that the law on this particular point was so stringent that he could not see any possibility of our winning the case. When the time for the trial arrived, my husband was in the hospital and could not appear with me in our defense. I had no witnesses, but the broker brought 3 attorneys and a number of witnesses into court against us. Our attorney now told me we had not the slightest chance to win. I turned to my imagination, and this is what I did. Completely disregarding all that had been said by attorneys, witnesses, and the judge who seemed to favor the plaintiff, I thought only of the words I wanted to hear. In my imagination, I listened intently and heard the foreman of the jury say, "We find the defendant not guilty." I listened until I knew it was true. I closed my mind's ear to everything said in that courtroom and heard only those words. "We find the defendant not guilty." The jury deliberated from noon recess until 4:30 that afternoon. And all during those hours I sat in the courtroom and heard those words over and over in my imagination. When the jurors returned, the judge asked the foreman to stand and give their verdict. The foreman stood up and said, "We find the defendant not guilty." Now this is a pretty interesting story because again, this has happened to other people as well. Though I haven't really particularly looked into these cases specifically where people actually got in contact with the law and were able to use their imagination to outgrow it or to get away from it or get free from it, especially in the cases where it might be just an innocent mistake. That's wonderful, right? Perhaps in other scenarios we would prefer a person not to use their imagination in that manner, but the law still stands. Imagination creates reality. Can you believe in it? If you do, you can make wonders happen in your life. So we gotta start believing in it. Alright, here we are with the third story. A year ago, I took my children to Europe, leaving my furnished apartment in the care of my maid. When we returned a few months later to the United States, I found my maid and all my furniture gone. The apartment superintendent stated that the maid had my furniture moved by my request. There was nothing I could do at the moment, so I took my children and moved into a hotel. I, of course, reported the incident to the police and also brought in private detectives on the case. Both organizations investigated every moving company and every storage warehouse in New York City, but to no avail. There seemed to be absolutely no trace of my furniture nor of my maid. Having exhausted all outside sources, I remembered your teaching and decided I would try using my imagination in this matter. So, while seated in my hotel room, I closed my eyes and imagined myself in my own apartment, sitting in my favorite chair and surrounded by all of my personal furnishings. I looked across the living room at the piano on which I kept pictures of my children. I would continue to stare at my piano until the entire room became vividly real to me. I could see my children's pictures and actually feel the upholstery of the chair in which, in my imagination, I sat. The next day, as I came out of my bank, I turned to walk in the direction of my vacant apartment, instead of toward my hotel. When I reached the corner, I discovered my mistake and was just about to turn back when my attention was drawn to a very familiar pair of ankles. Yes, the ankles belonged to my maid. I walked up to her and took hold of her arm. She was quite frightened, but I assured her all I wanted from her was my furniture. I called a taxi and she took me to the place in which her friends had stored my furnishings. In one day, my imagination had found what an entire big city police force and private investigators could not find in weeks. Now, that's another pretty interesting story. Things that go missing can be found by using your imagination. Even though I personally have not really had a situation where stuff went missing for me, that I had to use my imagination in that manner, still doesn't mean that I wouldn't use it if I ever had to. Would you do the same? Because again, imagination creates and influences your reality. Alright, here we are with the fourth story. Most of us read and love fairy stories, but we all know that stories of improbable riches and good fortune are for the delight of the very young. But are they? I want to tell you of something unbelievably wonderful that happened to me through the power of my imagination, and I am not young in years. We live in an age which believes in neither fable nor magic, and yet everything I could possibly want in my wildest daydreams was given to me by the simple use of what you teach. That imagination creates reality, and that feeling is the secret of imagining. At the time this wonderful thing happened to me, I was out of a job and had no family to fall back upon for support. I needed just about everything. To find a decent job, I needed a car to look for it, and though I had a car that was so worn out it was ready to fall apart. I was behind in my rent, I had no proper clothes to seek a job, and today it's no fun for a woman of 55 to apply for a job of any kind. My bank account was almost depleted and there was no friend to whom I could turn. But I had been attending your lectures for almost a year, and my desperation forced me to put my imagination to the test. Indeed, I had nothing to lose. It was natural for me, I suppose, to begin by imagining myself having everything I needed. But I needed so many things and in such short order that I found myself exhausted when I finally got through the list, and by that time I was so nervous I could not sleep. One lecture night I heard you tell of an artist who captured the feeling, or word as you called it, of "isn't it wonderful?" in his personal experience. I began to apply this idea to my case. Instead of thinking of and imagining every article I needed, I tried to capture the feeling that something wonderful was happening to me, not tomorrow, not next week, but right now. I would say over and over to myself as I fall asleep, "Isn't it wonderful? Something marvelous is happening to me now." And as I fell asleep, I would feel the way I would expect to feel under such circumstances. I repeated that imaginary action and feeling for 2 months, night after night, and one day in early October, I met a casual friend I hadn't seen for months who informed me he was about to leave on a trip to New York. I have lived in New York many years ago, and we talked of the city a few moments and then parted. I completely forgot the incident. 1 month later, to the day, this man called at my apartment and simply handed me a certified check in my name for $2,500. After I got over the initial shock of seeing my name on a check for so much money, the story that unfolded seemed to me like a dream. It concerned a friend I had not seen nor heard from in more than 25 years. This friend of my past, I now learned, had become extremely wealthy in those 25 years. Our mutual acquaintance who had brought the check to me had met him quite by accident during the trip to New York last month. During their conversation they spoke of me, and for reasons I was not to know, for to this day I have not heard from him personally and have never attempted to contact him, this old friend decided to share a portion of his great wealth with me. For the next 2 years from the office of his attorney I received monthly checks so generous in amount they not only covered every necessary requirement of daily living, but left much over for all the lovely things of life. A car, clothes, a spacious apartment, and best of all, no need to earn my daily bread. This past month I received a letter and some legal papers to be signed, which provided the continuation of this monthly income for the rest of my natural life. Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because they talked about a very important concept here. That is the word now. So yesterday I made a video about being aware in the present moment, and that is exactly what this person did as well. We want to feel good now, not tomorrow, not thinking, oh, I felt great yesterday, so it's long gone. No, you want to feel great right now, right here, right now. Whatever your goals are, feel great right now. Feel the wish fulfilled right now. Did you hear what I said? Right now. Right now is the only time you have. Right now is the time for your salvation. Right now the kingdom of God is coming. So you gotta feel your wish fulfilled right now. So when you're imagining your desires fulfilled, you gotta feel the joy right now. You gotta feel as if it's already happened right now. Now that is the last story I wanted to share with you through this video, and very soon we will have a part 4 with some more stories from Neville Goddard students. But until that time, consider this final part. It's all about how you feel right now. And with that being said, dear viewer, never forget that we are the dreamers.